mine is due to 2 snowplows that are right there.
Okay, good morning, everybody. We're going to get started. Okay, welcome to this meeting of the Built Heritage Subcommittee. We're going to go through the agenda. Firstly, I don't think we have regrets, so any declarations of interest? I see none. Confirmation of minutes from the January 14th, 2016 meeting. Carried. Great. We only have one substantive item for this meeting, which is the demolition of 171 Briere Street, a property designated under Part 5 of the Ontario Heritage Act and located in the Lower Town West Heritage Conservation District. Members will recall that this item came before us at our November meeting, and at that time we heard from staff and we heard from the applicant and a number of other speakers, and the resolution of the item at that time was to ask the applicant to explore other options at its disposal which may not involve demolition. So now that the applicant has the information based on our request to explore some of those options, they are in a position, I think, to answer some of those issues. But before we get to the applicant and our list of public speakers, I think what would be useful maybe is to ask staff to briefly recap the issue and the staff position, and then we will move to public delegations.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll, as I say, briefly recap the presentation that I gave in November for you now. So this is an application, as mentioned, under the Ontario Heritage Act to demolish a building in the Lower Town Heritage Conservation District, located on the north side of Briere, just to the west of the Cathcart Park. This shows the property in its context. It is surrounded by Ottawa Community. It is owned by Ottawa Community Housing and surrounded by townhouses and apartments on the south side, and on the north side. On the south side, there's quite an intact Lower Town street. Here's the building with its immediate neighbors. There it is in a face-on view. So the application is to demolish the existing building and to construct a parkette in its place. This is some of the concept of the parkette, which is proposed to mimic the character of the house and be a series of small spaces or rooms within the lot as it exists today. And this is more illustration of that. There are guidelines governing the demolition of buildings in the Heritage District, and as a general principle, demolition within the district will not be recommended. The official plan also has policies that address the city's own role as an owner of cultural heritage resources, and for these purposes, these policies also apply to OCH. So again, it says the city shall lead by example. There was a cultural heritage impact statement prepared on the property, which it stated that the parquet would provide a unique and positive resource for the district and is acceptable in this unique instance. The normal consultation took place, and the staff recommendation was to refuse the application to demolish 171 Bruyere and refuse the application for new construction. As you mentioned, Mr. Chair, there were questions raised, and the OCH, as the applicant, is back today with information, but the city's position, or the staff position, has remained the same on the property. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any questions for staff before we go to our public speakers? I just have one. In the report, there was mention of the fact that, I'm reading on page 4 of the staff report, that the building was probably constructed between 1910 to 1930 on partial foundations from the 1880s. And I'm just wondering if you have any sense of, so was there, in fact, because I'd heard from someone that there had been a fire with the original structure and that this was a rebuild in that period. Is that definite, or is it because we don't have historical records to be able to confirm whether this is a rebuild or not? I'm just a bit confused by the word. Was the probably refer to the time period, or the probably is we don't know for sure whether it was
probably Mr. Chair, the probably refers to the time period, because the method of research in the district was to bracket through using the fire insurance plans, but it's often difficult to tell because the footprint would be the same, and so it's not completely accurate. There was a request when there was some dispute about the score of the building based on construction dates, etc., and I reanalyzed it and did the formula, crunched the numbers again, and it wouldn't substantially change whether or not the building had significance or not. Certainly, some people think if it was older, it would be more significant. Others think it, it was linked to its owners. But I think that the further research that I undertook revealed that it wouldn't have changed. That information would not have changed staff's opinion regarding the potential demolition of the property.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, so why don't we go to our public speakers then. So I think we have the applicant up first, Cliff Udell and Bill Heber are, I believe, our first two speakers. Maybe you can both come on this side, that might be easier. Oh, okay. Hi. So good morning and welcome.
Good morning. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So we're back in front of this committee, and just a recap of our perspective on this property. So OCH obtained this property in the amalgamation of City Living with the old Ottawa Housing Corporation, and that was about 12, 13 years ago. This building would have been also absorbed by City Living when it did the wider development in that community, which happened in the late 70s. There's a lot of systemic problems with the building. This was, from our perspective, reconstructed at some point. The quality of the construction was marginal. So we've been challenged with this building over the years to try and keep it in a operational state, and it got to the point where the costs associated with keeping it in a healthy and safe perspective were so significant, we thought the appropriate use of those funds was to look at demolition and new construction. Well, we're very, very sensitive to heritage values, and we try and incorporate them in our daily work, and there's been numerous examples over the years where we've done that. This is one where we felt that the opportunity cost of going down that path was significant. Our core mandate, of course, is to provide housing to those in need. So anytime we spend $1, we have to evaluate what the opportunity costs. In this case, we're looking at $250,000 to $300,000 to do the repairs to bring it up to an adequate, say, where we can maintain it in the long term. We know that we can build 3 to 4 new homes with those funds. So from our mandate perspective, a tremendous opportunity cost. And it's not an easy decision. We obviously respecting the heritage aspects, but those are the challenges that we faced. And the fact that this building wasn't original and most of it had been reconstructed was also a concern from our perspective. And as we go through the renovation process, we know that much of the building would have to be replaced, including electrical and mechanical. Much of the structural in the interior is problematic, as well as cladding and foundation. So there was little salvageable out of the rigid building, short of the build form itself. The other complicating factor was the location on the site. As you can see from the picture behind you, it's very, very close to the mid-rise apartment. And affects the use of those people who have balconies on that side, and just not well situated at all. So we were faced with a dilemma, and we did look at opportunities, and we have evaluated the possibilities of sale and severance and sale, and also leasing. We have our solicitor available for questions next on the aspects of that. But when we got the numbers back, and I think you provide that information, it was, from our perspective, not a viable option. It would cost us money to sever and sell the property, and if that were the case, then we would look at the capital upgrades versus the severance and sale. It just wouldn't make any sense for us to do so. And then if we do that, obviously there's the opportunity costs associated with providing additional homes to other families. So when we looked at this, we thought from a taxpayer's perspective, as well as good citizens, we had to make a trade-off, and we felt that providing the housing to other families was our preference. We also reevaluated the parquet design. We had a community consultation, and the initial parquet design that was brought forward, the costs associated were quite significant. The feedback from the community was warm, I would say, and there was a strong support for a community garden in that neighborhood. They felt that there was a number of parks that would provide those services, and they didn't want an idle park. So we are looking at a hybrid, a parquet and community garden that would go on that site in lieu. So from our perspective, we would prefer the opportunity to proceed with the demolition and put in the parquet and community gardens. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Questions from members of the subcommittee? Mr. Vice Chair.
I'm familiar with the property and also have read the report that you've tabled with the Built Heritage Committee about the financial implications of it. I guess I understand the rationale that you've applied to advancing the cause for demolishing this small house in the Heritage Conservation District. I just wondered, and this is a broad question, you know, the mandate of Ottawa Community Housing, of course, is to deliver affordable rental housing in the city, a much-needed resource with many on the waiting list. But you also, you know, being a kind of creature of the City of Ottawa and Council, must recognize that this action, if it's approved by Council, will have significant impact on the city's ability to prevent other demolitions by either private property owners or maybe even nonprofit groups. And you surely must recognize that this will be a precedent where the city can be easily held to harbor a double standard, that the city council would approve, you know, the demolition of a residence in the Heritage Conservation District owned essentially by the public, but then what would be your position to private owners that plead the same kind of financial problem and the difficulty with renovating and the costs? So, like, how would you, you know, suggest that City Council make that case to others to demonstrate that the city doesn't have a double standard? I
guess the unique aspects of this situation I would suggest are the fact that it wasn't original to the site and had been rebuilt. I think the location of the building isn't insignificant. If you drive through that neighborhood, you get to see there are sections of that street which are pretty much original, and the houses have been well maintained, and there's a certain flavor. This is absolutely adjacent to a mid-rise building in a townhouse development. So in terms of the overall feel for the community, I think it is a bit of an exception from that perspective. Yeah, when you also look at the capital costs, I think it is extremely significant because there's very little to be retained in that building. And when you put that all together, I think it is reasonably unique in the scheme of things. So I think that makes it unique and not necessarily precedent-setting from that perspective.
I have a question myself, which is when you went back to Infrastructure Ontario and discussed what would be involved with severing the property, if memory serves, the estimate of the total upfront cost for OCH would be in the range of $250,000, is that correct, in terms of the costs, and then plus the legal fees and transfers fees? Is that an accurate ballpark figure?
Yes. We have our legal counsel here who can speak to the specifics, but a lot depends on how they appraise the value, but ostensibly we'd be paying that back, the appraised value of the property back to them, plus all of the fees associated with the lost interest over the period of the mortgage. So in any scenario, it ends up being a net cost to us, plus the land's lost, plus we lose control over over land too, and who knows what may happen with it with the new purchaser. So there's a range of challenges with that. But it would come at a net cost of, and Brian can speak to it more specifically, but I think $50,000 to $100,000 to divest.
Okay, so in some ways it wasn't just an issue of financial calculation. I mean, if you could sell the property for roughly the same price, it would be a wash in terms of the finances. But what you're saying is you deemed there to be a value for OCH in maintaining control of the property since it was right adjacent to the existing building, and some concerns about future conflict between a future tenant or future owner of that building and OCH?
Yes, if it was situated in Edmund Spot, I think it would look a bit different, but when you look at the location, the challenges with parking and so on and so forth, we know that having a private ownership in the middle of our community would be challenging at best. And there is going to be a net cost of $50,000 to $100,000 to the sale on top of that. And furthermore, we would be encumbering all our property and around that for future development opportunities. When you roll them all back to back, it was problematic. And we certainly wouldn't look at divestiture from that perspective.
Question, Member Smalley?
Thank you. I certainly appreciate your dilemma. One thing I would make, you mentioned that from the taxpayer's perspective, I think sometimes we assume that taxpayers only have one view when they're taxpayers. I'm a taxpayer and have been in Ottawa for over 40 years. From my perspective, I don't just look at how cheap something can be done or how we can save money. I don't think that's a way to have a livable city, is to constantly think we can save money by certain actions. So I think we should be careful when we say from the taxpayer's perspective, because certainly I am a taxpayer. I understand the challenge because I also have owned old properties for a long time, and I think the fundamental problem is that you're trying to provide affordable housing, and an old building is not really the best way to do that. I can see that. I know that if a young couple bought that house and they said, oh, we could fix it up and live in it, they'd find all sorts of ways to cut corners and make it so that it would work. But you guys can't do that. You've got all sorts of rules and regulations you have to follow, and that makes it very difficult to make that old building work for you, and it's probably the layout doesn't work either. So I can't see an easy solution to it, and I certainly understand and sympathize with you. I wonder, the only thing I can think of, which is probably not a very smart idea, but the only thing I can think of is there any chance you could lease that property out? You would still maintain ownership of it, but could you lease it out for $1 or something to some, would that destroy things for you? If you could lease it out, somebody could fix it up and have it for a 5-year lease for $1 or something, that then you at least would still have control.
And we did look at that alternative, and again, Brian can speak to it in more detail. And when we worked out the numbers on it, and frankly, we reached out to some nonprofit organizations to see if there was any interest. And because there's no ownership piece in the lease arrangement, and there's going to be significant capital costs, even if you cut corners, it's going to be significant. I can't imagine you can make it reasonably habitable for under $150,000 or $200,000. So someone would have to invest that money up front without any security against the property because of the encumbrances. So we looked at it and we worked the numbers to see even if someone rented out at full market rent for a 20-year lease, could you recover the costs? And when we worked the numbers, it just wouldn't work out because it would have been nice for us if we could have, by all means.
Okay, seeing no other questions, thank you very much for coming back with that additional information. And so at this stage, is it Brian Hebert who's going to come up next? Okay.
I was over here, Mr. Chairman, to address any questions which might have arisen in connection with the disposition of the property and the discharge of the existing financing that's on it today.
Okay.
There's no other issues that I would refer to that.
Okay, would members of the committee like to ask specific questions of Mr. Hebert? No? Okay, and then Stéphane Guiguer was also on the list. Stéphane, oh, there you are. Hi.
Actually, same point as Brian, I was here to answer some questions, if there were any questions.
Okay. Okay, so for those who don't know, Mr. Guiguer is the CEO of OCH, so if there are any other specific questions of the agency, Mr. Guiguer could answer them. If not, that's okay too. I don't see any hands up, so thank you very much for that offer. I don't think we have any other speakers on our list, so at this stage, I can open the floor to comments or observations before we go to a vote. Councillor Fleury.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. On se retrouve devant un dilemme important, un peu particulier au même moment. J'apprécie la volonté du comité de donner la chance à Logement communautaire de retourner voir ce qui était possible au niveau de la vente, au niveau de la location. C'était de bonnes questions. Ça a permis au groupe de faire des analyses complètes sur ce qui était faisable, pas seulement regarder au niveau du nombre d'unités puis du coût. This property has been vacant for a short while, but you have to know that OCH has invested significantly in this property. It wasn't an intended purpose to leave that property vacant. Amounts of money, I don't know offhand, but around $100,000 was spent on the foundation in a short while. And a family moved out, and then when the analysis of the property was done, once that family moved out, we realized additional issues had arisen from the property, including the site being a major fire trap and accessibility concerns. So beyond all the elements that are considered today, I want you to know that the corporation takes very seriously, I, as the local councillor, take very seriously the heritage property and the heritage features. But I also want you to know that OCH as a corporation didn't just abandon that property. It invested in that property. When the unit became vacant, we did an analysis, and this information came about. So it's an unfortunate situation. You won't see OCH come to you with projects like that. That is not part of our portfolio management at all. It's quite the opposite. But there is a very specific situation here that committee's asked, and although it's tough, I think that we have to look at it from a series of perspectives. We're limited by the amount of families, the amount of units we could provide out of the property. There's significant capital costs that we'd incur to do so for one unit. And at the same time, we've looked at opportunities for leasing, for selling, and we're really tied into tout ce qui a aspect au niveau financier on souhaite, c'est ce que les résidents nous ont demandé. Quand on a rencontré les locataires des logements qui sont adjacents, parce que c'est tout du logement communautaire, il y avait des résidents de la base ville, évidemment, il y avait des résidents de logement communautaire, puis les gens nous ont dit, oui, on aimerait que ça reste, mais on comprend la dynamique, on l'a vu, la propriété, c'est pas idéal. Mais on a aussi entendu, comme Cliff l'a bien mentionné, que les gens ne souhaiteraient pas voir un parklet. Ce qu'ils veulent vraiment, c'est un jardin communautaire. Ce qui n'est pas bien indiqué, c'est qu'à l'est du bâtiment, du 4 étages, il y a un parc. Il y a un petit parc. Puis les gens, ils trouvent qu'au niveau de l'espace vert, au niveau du parklet, ce serait adéquat. Donc, à ce niveau-là, je sais que le logement communautaire est prêt à travailler avec les gens qui habitent dans les maisons arrangées, ainsi que les personnes nées dans le bâtiment, pour aménager l'espace comme ils le souhaitent. Au minimum, ce serait un jardin communautaire, mais il pourrait y avoir des bancs, il pourrait y avoir des améliorations à ce niveau-là. Alors, c'est sûr que pour nous, c'est une décision importante. On prend pas ça au sérieux, puis on n'est pas délinquant dans la discussion. On a pris une analyse complète. On vient avec vous avec un dossier qui a été bien rodé, puis on souhaite avoir l'appui. Puis je peux vous assurer que c'est pas une habitude que le logement communautaire va avoir d'être devant vous. Ce que vous allez voir, c'est vraiment des réinvestissements dans les propriétés. On a fait ce qu'on a pu, par exemple, dans ce cas ici, puis il n'y a vraiment pas d'alternative.
Merci, conseiller Fleury. J'apprécie beaucoup le fait que tu aies expliqué un peu le contexte. Other comments and questions before we proceed? Mr. Vice Chair.
Mr. Chair, I just want to comment that I strongly support the staff recommendation to refuse the demolition. The reason for it is not that I don't understand very, very well the difficulties with renovating modest buildings in heritage districts. In my career, I've worked on many, many hundreds of buildings, some in poorer condition than this, and have turned them around. I've also been lucky enough to have done about 1,000 nonprofit residential units for Ottawa Community Housing and other nonprofit organizations. So I know the dilemma that OCH has. Having said that, I think the staff recommendation is absolutely right in that what it does is it protects the heritage policy of the city, and if the City Council approves the demolition of this house in the Heritage Conservation District, this will be a landmark demolition that will indicate and send a message to all private property owners that find their decaying houses in heritage conservation districts. It will send them the message that they can use this as a precedent. And I think that I raised the point about the double standard where City Council can, for its convenience in the public interest, permit a demolition of one of its own properties, in this case, property owned by Ottawa Community Housing, but then we'll turn around and take a hard line against others that plead the same kind of arguments. So I will be supporting the staff recommendation and urge my colleagues here to support it as well.
Thank you very much. Councillor Wilkinson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I know the property well because when I was chair of Ottawa Community Housing, I actually went into the building with staff to take a look at it to see if we actually could do anything with it. And it was obvious that it would be extremely difficult and all. And I also looked at where it's situated. And I think that's an important thing that makes the distinction between this and other properties. It has a parking lot on two sides of it and an apartment building on the other side and the street front on the other side. So it isn't a typical building that anybody would come and say we have to save it, because most properties that are individual, this one kind of isn't, it's part of a bigger property, have some sort of a property lines and things like that which set it off from other properties. So I don't worry about the fact that they can use it as a precedent. Besides that, we know that anybody that comes to get anything searches for anything that they can use to get at things, and that's something we have to deal with as a committee. But if it's not if it's plunk in the middle of another property with parking lots all the way around it, maybe it'll be similar, but I don't know very many places like that in Centertown. So I really think that we have to, in this case, look at the better good for the community, which is, in fact, to have it taken down. And even though I like to save community properties, I like to save heritage properties, I don't think this is one that we should put a lot of effort on.
Okay, thank you very much. Member Smallwood.
Thank you. I just couldn't let that go without saying I have a building on Bronson Avenue that I've had since the 1970s, and it has high-rises across the street from it and a parking lot right next door to it, and with a plan for a big high-rise coming. And I could then use this as an excuse and say, hey, you know, I'm surrounded by parking lots and high-rises. There's only one other old building left. I should tear mine down and build a high-rise there.
Okay, well, if no other members want to speak, I just want to offer my own observations on this file, which, as others have pointed out, I think is very tricky. I don't think there's an easy answer here. I don't think there's this black and white. I think there are many shades of gray involved. I want to read to you from the Lowertown West Heritage Conservation District guidelines, which says, as a general principle, demolition of structures within the district will not be recommended for approval by City Council. So I think the test that we have to examine this morning is, are the circumstances at play here sufficient to be an exception to the general principle? And I guess for that reason, I have to respectfully disagree with the Vice Chair. I don't think that whatever we do in a particular case should ever be seen as a precedent for other properties. I think very much we need to analyze every application on its own merits to essentially evaluate whether or not, again, the threshold to permit demolition it has been successfully made. But it is important to say that as a general principle, demolition of structures will not be permitted. So I don't want the message, no matter what the outcome of this is, to be that this is open season on the Heritage Conservation District, because I don't think that's right legally. I think in this case, when the applicant came to us in November, we did the right thing. We felt that there hadn't been sufficient work done on exploring alternatives to demolition. And over the course of the last 3 months, we now have at our availability some of that further data. I think where what I feel is important here in this case is that best efforts were made to explore some of the alternatives, and it looks like from a public interest point of view, those alternatives are difficult. I think the point of OCH being a public entity is important in two ways. I think it's correct, as the Vice Chair said, that we have to hold public agencies to a high standard for heritage protection. I think that's correct. Equally, however, what's interesting in this case is the request for demolition is not being made for private gain. It's being made actually for reasons of public interest in a couple of different ways. I mean, one is the fact that with the money available to OCH, or which would otherwise be available for the repair, more units of affordable housing can be built in our city. So I think that's the first point of public interest. I think the second point is that the space which is currently occupied by the house is intended to be used for a community purpose. So there too, the community and the public will benefit if there is a demolition in a way that a private landowner would not be providing a similar benefit to community members in any application for demolition. So I do think it's important to distinguish the specific conditions of this case, and B, the fact that the public entity argument, in my mind, works in both ways. So having said all that, and again, admitting that this is a difficult issue, I have concluded on the basis of all of the arguments this morning that I will vote against the recommendation, and suggest approving demolition, not because I want to, but because I think on balance of the public interest, it slightly outweighs the other alternative. So with that, I guess...
Thank you. I think that was very well said by the chair. I think the work that has been done by OCH and by Councillor Fleury and the chair on this, I think is important, and I believe this isn't easy. I think this is one of those decisions that you could vote either way and feel comfortable with your vote. But the reality is we have to make a decision, and it's not our job to sit here on the fence. So I will bring forward an amendment that the Bill Heritage Subcommittee recommend, the Planning Committee recommend the Council approve the application to demolish 171 Briere Street, a property located in Lower Town West Heritage Conservation District designated under Part 5 of the Ontario Heritage Act. And number 2, approve the application to construct a parkette at 171 Briere in the Lower Town West Heritage Conservation District designated under Part 5 of the Ontario Heritage Act.
Okay, so I think procedurally what we'll do is we will vote first on the amended motion from Councillor Moffat. If that succeeds, that's fine. If it fails, we would go back to the original motion. Did you want to speak, Councillor McKinney?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So in your amended motion, you have put in that OCH will build a parkette. Does that lock OCH into the parkette, or can it be something else? Can it be a community garden? I think we heard that that there was some appetite in the community for a community garden.
I think that's a great question. Depending on the outcome of the vote of Councillor Moffat's amendment, if it succeeds, I would recommend that the committee give direction to staff to work with the applicant to include the community garden as part of the parkette proposal, if that's acceptable. But we can cross that bridge once we get to it. So I guess the way we have to... Mr. Vice Chair?
Just a question on the amendment. I hadn't read it, but I just listened to it. Can you just explain how it differs from the
only way it differs from the recommendation before you is that instead of the word refuse happening twice, the word approve happens twice.
Okay. Okay, so why don't we do yeas and nays on Councillor Moffat's amended motion?
Councillor Wilkinson?
Yes.
Member Quinn?
No.
Member Smallwood?
No.
Councillor McKenney?
Yes.
Councillor Moffat?
Yes.
Vice Chair?
No.
Chair?
Yes.
4 yeas, 3 nays.
Okay. So on the basis of a 4-3 vote, the Bill Heritage Subcommittee is going to recommend to Planning Committee to recommend to Council to approve the application for demolition. With that vote, I would ask staff to work with the applicant, should this motion be approved at Council, to incorporate the community's interest in having a community garden as part of the parkette. Is that clear enough?
Mr. Chair, we'll take that as direction. Thank you.
Okay. And so, yeah, I mean, I think as Councillor Moffat said, that wasn't an easy item. You never like to see split votes, but I think in this case, reasonable people can look at this and reasonably disagree. So I'm not too concerned about major splits in the committee on this. This was a hard one. Sure.
Just one follow-up comment. I've been on this committee since it started, as have the members of the public. That's the first time we've ever had a vote that split along councillor public member line. That's the first time ever. We've never had that 4-3 vote before where it was that. So I think that's...
This could be the start of something.
Well, no, I'm not saying it's the start of something. I'm just saying that's a testament to the work of the community that hasn't happened. That was the fear.
Okay, so with... Okay, so we have finished that item, so we're just carrying on with the rest of the agenda. Any notices of motions? Any inquiries? Any other business that members wanted to bring? Yeah, sure.
A question about perhaps staff can answer, just with regards to the development on Queen and Sparks and Bay, the old Delta Hotel. Have you heard about a possible request for a designation of that mid-century
building?
Mr. Chair, we have received a request to designate the complex at 350 Spark Street, 157 Bay, that was the rezoning of which was approved at City Council yesterday.
Okay.
Wondering what happens there? If the rezoning has been approved,
Maybe.
would that be something we'd still consider ultimately?
So Ms. Snedden, I think, wants to address this.
Mr. Chair, yes, so the zoning was approved. The Heritage Services unit had already, prior to this, had reviewed whether or not there was heritage value in the properties in question, and the decision was made not to pursue with any heritage designations.
Okay. So if no other business, then we're adjourned. And just a note on the next meeting, which is Thursday, the 10th of March. Stay tuned. I don't know at this stage whether we have a lot of items on the agenda for that meeting, but I will give you certainly a lot of heads up if we end up needing or not needing to hold that meeting if there's nothing on the agenda. So for now, we'll keep it, but I will be in touch if we end up not having substantive items for that meeting. So thank you very much.